Hey everybody, how's it going? Mork here. Today we're continuing with the enchantments for Mordheim Paramod, and we're gonna be looking for the headgear enchantments. We're gonna be starting essentially with Rune of Ages, which essentially just increases your parry by 20%. I don't really like over investing into parry because parry can just be bypassed by melee attacks that ignore parry, and usually like having 120% parry is already good enough, and that's easily achievable with 20 weapon skill and a shield. So this is usually just like an overkill. And I would also say it competes with the Rune of Constitution, which just increases your maximum wounds by 30. I think you're just kind of better off going for the Rune of Constitution and just getting like some wounds, which is more of a general defense, rather than like specifically going for like 20% parry. I wouldn't use it, the Rune of Ages. The blue one can be quite nice if you just like stumble upon it, because it can again allow you to get quicker to the 95% parry chance, so that can be nice. Rune of Celerity is actually one of my favorites. So this one increases initiative by 20 for a character. I wouldn't be using like Rune of Celerity to just try to like fix the initiative of your warband. I wouldn't really do that. I think like the preferred use for the Rune of Celerity is when you're in like a PvP match. And for example, you are in a situation where you're playing like an ambush map, right? Or like where the units are just incredibly close by, like everybody's super close, and your opponent expects you to have like certain initiative. So what you can do is just kind of like surprise the enemy and just grab like Rune of Celerity, and in that case, like your opponent didn't expect that you're gonna be like 20 initiative higher, and that could give you like the upper hand in whatever PvP match yeah, you need to win. So that's for me like the use of Rune of Celerity. The next one that we have is Rune of Change. So this one is when casting spells, it increases the chance to trigger a Tzeentch's Curse by 20%. And you also become immune to injuries, broken jaw, old battle wound, brain trauma, and megalomania. So I assume these wounds are just kind of caster related. I don't remember off of my head. You would want to play it on a Doomweaver, essentially, right? And I feel like that's about it. The immunities to injuries, it's just like a nice bonus. Like, what's the most important thing here is just like the increased chance to trigger the Tzeentch's Curse. So yeah. Next rune that we have is Rune of Clarity, and this one gives immunities to Amok, Impacted Vision, Megalomania, and Confusion. Never use it. I guess if you find it, you can go ahead and use it, but I wouldn't bother. Like, the issue with this sort of an injury rune, in order for you to like get the effect, you are assuming that one of your guys is gonna go down, right? But the thing is, in my opinion, Mordheim is a sort of a game where you don't want anybody to go down ever. Because yeah, sure, you can like dodge these injuries, which are like written here, but you can also just die from injuries. So why would you roll the die in the first place? So instead of like Rune of Clarity, you could have a rune which increases your survivability, so that you don't go down in the first place. So yeah. Rune of Climbing. So this one increases chance to pass climbing tests by 50%. I really like this one. I especially like this one on archers. On archers who are not fully committing to like going as much agility as possible. So in Mordheim you have like different athletic tests. You have the jump down, you have the leap, and then you have the climbing test, right? So climbing test scales the worst with your agility. So like a bonus to climbing in that case is rather nice. And okay, let's think about like the jump down test. If you fail the jump down test, you just lose some health. And that's completely fine. That's okay. That's an acceptable thing to happen. That's why like swift jump is like really good. Leap. So if you fail leap, that can really suck. But the thing about leap is that there are not many places where you even use leap to begin with. It's like very rare on the maps to have like any leap spots, especially on maps that are not like campaign related, and even like a lot of campaign related maps don't really have any of those spots either. So yeah, it's important to pass sleeping tests, but they're almost non-existent. And then we have like the climbing test, and the climbing test is like the most important, because if you fail a climbing test, that could be like a difference between being saved and getting to safety, and also like just dying because you didn't manage to climb up to safety, right? So like failing yeah, because if you fail the climbing test, you're still down there, right? And I think it's sometimes even like more preferred over, what do you call it? Over the Rune of Constitution, right? Because you can also have like a quick climb, or I think it's called quick climb or something like that, which like reduces your chance for like climbing, but you know the climbing becomes for free. And at that point, if you're trying to climb over and over again, you might deal like to yourself like more damage than 30. So in that case, like the Rune of Climbing kind of like can be legit. Another situation like which can be quite common is, for example, if you need to get your archers to a good position with like have them climb up, right? And if they don't climb up, they're gonna be losing some strategy points, and those strategy points could have been like used for reloading, for example, right? So yeah, that's why I like Rune of Climbing. I really like it, and I think it's quite legit, let's say. All right. Next rune that we have is Rune of Concentration, and this one just gives plus 5% to cast spells. So this is like a spellcaster rune, but I don't think it's all that great. Yeah, I don't really think like Rune of Concentration is like all that great. Like plus 5% to cast spells is nice, but I don't think you need to like solve your issue with like your spellcasting chance with this rune when there exists like a consumable, which is like Etheric Focus, right? And Etheric Focus increases your arcane spellcasting chance by 10% for 3 turns. And when you use it, you don't lose this item. You keep it in your inventory until the end of times or until somebody like steals it off of you. Essentially, if you need to up your like spellcasting chance, I would just use the etheric focus. And if you're playing like PvP matches, then you can also just use the Rod of Concentration. And this one increases spellcasting chance by 15% for 3 turns. And by the time those 3 turns like tick, the game should be just over, or like the most important part of the game should be over. So yeah, I wouldn't use it honestly. And also like I wouldn't use it because there are simply better spellcasting enchantments for the headgear in my opinion. So Rune of Constitution. So Rune of Constitution is probably the most common rune you're gonna be seeing in headgears. It gives you plus 30 wounds, but it's not just like plus 30 wounds, it scales with the toughness, you know, so it can be like 42 or something like that. And this is probably like one of the strongest runes you can like find in Mordheim. And this is also the rune that competes against every other single rune. So like some of the rune effects here are really neat, but you don't, they're not as good as the Rune of Constitution. You know, it's too good, right? Would I rather have like increased chance to parry by 20%, or would I rather have like increased maximum wounds by 30? Rune of Courage. So Rune of Courage increases the chance to pass All Alone, Fear, and Terror tests by 15%. This one is like really nice, right? So if you want to use it, it makes a lot of sense. Most commonly, like Rune of Courage is used on dodgy characters to like so that your terror test is like 100% and you cannot like fail it and just instantly die on the spot. And also just for like Serenity tanks, like this is also just very common. Next one that we have is Rune of Dexterity, and this one increases the chance to pass Climb, Leap, and Jump Down tests by 20%. I mean, I think it can be alright, especially on like a Night Runner. If let's say your Night Runner, or like the way you've built your Night Runner is that you're just missing 20% chance to pass the jump down test to be like fully at 95%. I think in that case you can just consider the Rune of Dexterity. But in all the other cases, I think you would just kind of prefer having the Rune of Climbing. As was discussed before, like passing the leap and jump down test is not as important as passing the climb test. The Rune of Dismay. So this one, when dealing damage, reduces the target's chance to pass All Alone, Fear, and Terror tests by 8% for 3 turns. So this one I kind of considered on like Undead, or like in the Undead Warband before, but I think again like this kind of just competes with Rune of Constitution, so you end up not taking it. What I think is like more commonly used with Rune of Dismay is using it on support archers, right? So when you like hit a target, you get like a bonus of also like reducing the All Alone, Fear, and Terror tests, and that can be quite nice. So it's definitely usable for sure. Okay, next one that we have is Rune of Escape, and this one is probably one of my favorites. If you're playing a sort of a hit and run strategy, for example, with crit Skaven, you know, where you just crit somebody to death and then you just like disengage and you run away. Rune of Escape is like amazing because it increases your movement range, right? So if you have like 8 movement or like 9 movement with Skaven, then you're gonna end up having like 10 movement, and that's gonna like make it really difficult for enemy to actually catch you. So it really is just kind of used for those hit and run strategies. Rune of Evasion is kind of just depressive, I guess. I mean, it increases the chance to dodge by 10%. I'm not really sure why this one is like 10% and the parry one is like 20%. I mean, I guess it might be thought that like dodge is superior because it like works against everything, but parry is just like more offense, right? So I don't know. I probably wouldn't use it. I think you're probably better off like for dodge builds going for something like Rune of Courage if you need it. Rune of Evasion, I think it could be like usable if it was maybe like 20%, but like 10%, I don't think it's worth it. Yeah, I don't think it's worth it. Next one, Rune of Fate. I mean, we just kind of like discussed this already, so you would rather just play something that you don't get like injured in the first place. Rune of Focus. So this one increases ambush range by 3 meters. And this one's actually quite nice. Well, is it? So that's kind of like the thing, right? Like Rune of Focus, it is nice, and the ambush range increased is relevant and is nice as well. But who do you use it on? Is the question. I mean, I'm getting like some ideas for like ambush Skaven, right? Because, you know, people get kind of upset if you like break their ambushes. So this is like one way to make your ambushes like more effective. And, you know, just increased ambush range can also just catch people off guard. I guess you would use like the Rune of Focus on some sort of an ambusher build, but I don't think ambusher builds are like a thing. To begin with, without going into the meme territory. And if you're like playing some sort of a bodyguard, then I think there are better runes than Rune of Focus than you can use. You're gonna be like better off making your bodyguard tank here with Rune of Constitution, so that he tanks, you know. Rune of Foresight. So this one gives plus 9% range resistance. I think this one could be quite nice, especially if you're gonna be using this on like a melee resistance tank, so you don't get hit by range attacks, right? I feel like melee resistance tanks should also just get a bunch of like range resistance, because if your melee resistance tank is just gonna get gunned down by ranged weapons, then what's the point? Right? I don't think it's worth it. I think Rune of Foresight is kind of like an alternative to the Rune of Courage. Next we have Rune of Fortitude. We've already discussed the ones with the injuries, so let's skip it. Rune of Hardiness. So this one increases poison resistance by 40%. If you know you're gonna be coming up against like a poison warband, you can put it on and, you know, suddenly you have plus 40% poison resistance, and you didn't even have to really use much of your brain there. I don't know like why the number is so much higher for poison resistance. I guess the idea is that, you know, you just hate poison, so you make it like relatively easy. I don't know. I don't know. I just like, okay, just like let's compare it, right? Because we have like Rune of Foresight, and that this one gives like plus 9% range resistance. So that seems reasonable to me. We also have like a Rune of Spellbreaking, and this one increases magical resistance by 10%. And then we have like Rune of Hardiness, and this one increases poison resistance by 40%. So I can just like hard counter an enemy just by swapping my enchantments. I don't think that's very fun. And I don't think you're gonna like, I guess you could be using it technically speaking on your warp guards, so that, you know, they survive your clouds, your poison warband. I mean, that's also like a way to use it. But most of the time, this rune just kind of exists as like a hate against poison. All right. Next one that we have is Rune of Innervation, and this one is like when casting a spell, you receive a 50% chance to recover 1 offense point. So this one is essentially the casino. It is really good. This could be like a difference between you casting like 5 lightning bolts instead of like 4 lightning bolts, right? So like for example, Savior here has a quick casting. With quick casting, he's able to cast 4 lightning strikes. He might just get lucky. Like sometimes he might just get lucky with your spell casting, and sometimes you just get like 1 offense point, and you save up like 1 strategy point because you didn't have to use like quick casting. Right, so this can be like really powerful, but it's essentially a casino. But a casino that has like a really good wins, right? So yeah, you might be able to get like 5 spell casts in, but like the more you cast spells, the more dangerous it becomes. And I definitely use this in the past on warlocks, and it's very good. Alright, next one that we have is Rune of Jumping, and this one increases the chance to pass jump down tests by 90%. This one is just almost useless. It can be just essentially used by, what do you call them? By the Night Runners, because Night Runners care about passing the Rune of Jumping test, because if they pass the test, they're gonna have like their movement increased. So for them, it's important. Rune of Leaping is just useless, so I think we can just move on. Rune of Lucidity, which increases chance to pass stupidity tests by 75%. So Rune of Lucidity can be just pretty much used in the campaign, where you know that you're gonna be going to the palace, and you know there are gonna be like a bunch of demonettes there, which are gonna have like hypnotic allure, which cause like hypnotic allure causes stupidity. So like that's one way to use it. Another character that is stupid in Mordheim, it's Red Ogre. You know, so a lot of people just kind of like plonking down like Rune of Lucidity on the Red Ogre so that they don't have to like think about the stupidity. But I don't think that's necessary, like, to do that against like a Red Ogre. I think it's just like relatively, yeah, I think it's just relatively easy to set up like a guidance. And there's also like an anti-stupidity potion, I believe. Let me just check, maybe I have it in inventory. Yeah, so you have like the draw the focus, and this one nullifies the effect of stupidity for 3 turns, so I think like on a Red Ogre, you would just prefer having like the Rune of Constitution, because you're most likely gonna have like a very high wounds value there. So that's Rune of Lucidity. Next one is Rune of Memory, and you know, we've discussed it, so... Alright, next one is Rune of Morale. This one increases moral value by 6. I've never ever used this. And I think it would be crazy for you to try to use this rune instead of like the wounds increase. If you're using a Rune of Morale, you are either like some sort of a genius who has like some sort of a weird master plan where like some exact moral value like changes the game or something like that. Or you're like a dumb person which you just uses Rune of Morale for some reason. So I don't know, like I've never... I mean, if you get like an item with Rune of Morale, you just sell it. So that's how you use the Rune of Morale. Right, next one is the Rune of Pain, and this one just increases damage dealt by spells by 20%. So this one is obviously really nice for the damage spellcasters, but you know, the damage spellcasters, they also might like, not only like Rune of Pain, they also might like the rune that we talked about, the Rune of Innervation, or they also might like Rune of Reach, but we'll get there when we get there. I think this just kind of like is straightforward and you just use it on the damage spellcasters. Okay, the next one is Rune of Piety, which increases charge distance by 3 meters. I believe the last time I had this rune on my Ogre, it didn't... I don't think it worked, but I'm not sure. But this rune is actually, if it works, this rune is significantly better than the ambush one, because when you're charging, you are the person who is in control of the charge. When you're ambushing, it's your enemy who triggers the ambush, and you're not in control of what's going on. Yeah, and just like being able to beat like the ambush distance by increasing your charge distance can be very relevant for the mighty charge builds, for example. So Rune of Piety, I think, is definitely usable, but I don't know if it actually works or not. I really don't remember. Yeah. Rune of Reach. Now, Rune of Reach increases the range of spells by 6 meters, and it does not affect spells centered on the caster, which, you know, makes sense. Rune of Reach is actually really freaking nice on artillery spellcasters, right? So, yeah, like, Rune of Pain increased damage dealt is really nice on your damage casters, but if you cannot safely reach your enemies, then you're gonna be just kind of like better off with Rune of Reach, right? There's like a huge difference between having like a 36 meters and being able to cast your spells at 42 meters, because like the further away you are from the enemy, the safer you are. And if you cannot quite approach the enemy, or like approaching is not quite safe, then you know, like dealing less damage at a higher range is much better than dealing no damage at a lower range, or like increased but no damage at the lower range because you're afraid to like come closer to the enemy. So Rune of Reach is very good for artillery spellcasters. An artillery spellcaster, it's a warlock, it's a necromancer, it can be Doomweaver. Yeah. A fun interaction with Rune of Reach is also the Warrior Priest, which has like the healing spell, which is like touch range, but you know, with Rune of Reach you can increase it. That's quite fun. And what else? Oh, and also like the Sith Lord Lightning with the Skaven spellcaster is also quite fun with Rune of Reach. Yeah. Rune of Spellbreaking. So Rune of Spellbreaking is quite nice. It increases just magic resistance by 10%, so, you know, it's good. If you're trying to, like, make sure that you know that you're gonna be coming up against a spell warband, you can just kind of use it in advance, and it just makes a lot of sense to use it. So yeah. Now, Rune of the Senses is quite interesting. I think it could be like potentially usable on any scout units. I think like scout units are a thing for very offensive warbands that just need the information of where the enemy is so that you can like plan accordingly. So I think there is definitely use for the Rune of the Senses, but I never noticed that it actually exists, and I also never noticed that it has like a lower price tag than the other runes. That is an interesting change. But yeah, Rune of the Senses. If you really need like 95% perception test chance, I think this is actually quite legit, right? Because very often you might not have like that 95% chance, and then you can get like frustrated because you're not like passing your perception test. Like, this is definitely usable, and I kind of like it. I'll definitely have to like look more into this rune in the future, for sure. Okay, then we have the Rune of the Warp. So this one increases Wordstone resistance by 50%. So technically speaking, I guess you could use it on the Skaven spellcaster. You could also use it, technically speaking, on the Necromancer, because those guys like picking up Wordstone and they don't like getting like negative effects from the Wordstone. I think it's just like those two characters, but then it's just kind of like arguable. Would like Rune of the Warp be better, or would it be just better to get like Rune of Pain for your Necromancer, or like Rune of Innervation for your Necromancer? And most of the time, you're gonna go with the Rune of Innervation or Rune of Pain or Rune of Reach. So I think that's the approach. And then we have Rune of True Grit, and this one increases stun resistance by 20%. Again, I feel like the only characters that care about stun resistance is, I think it's just kind of Doomweaver. So this is definitely usable, or like considerable to run on a Doomweaver so that he doesn't like stun himself. I think I do run like stun resistance, usually also on my warlocks, but I can't really fit this rune in because all the other spellcasting runes are just better. So again, this just kind of like becomes like a question of, is like 20% stun resistance better than everything else? Yeah, and that's about it for the headgear enchantments. The next thing that we're gonna be looking at are gonna be the weapons, and we'll probably also just wrap up the chest gear, right? Alright, take care and bye bye.